Hi everyone, this is Bobby from bn-games.com, and today we have the new 2021 24-inch iMac. This one is actually my mother's iMac. I actually bought this iMac for her because she's been an Apple user for about 10 years now, and it was time to upgrade. She's currently rocking a 27-inch 2013 iMac, base model basically. Has an i5, and I did upgrade the RAM to 16 gigs, but generally speaking it's a base model iMac of that era. And since Apple's moving away from Intel Silicon to their own native silicon, it's about time. That Mac still works, obviously, but the boot times are pretty abysmal at this point after multiple OS upgrades. But this video is really going to be more me talking to the camera as I unbox this and turn it on for the first time. A IT person's perspective, my perspective. I've been in the industry for about 20 years now, working in IT, and I am what I like to call platform agnostic. And what I mean by that is I use anything that works. Every platform that is out there right now has strengths and weaknesses. It's the same for Apple, it's the same for Windows. You know, I do not discriminate against platforms. I'll use whatever works. So, for example, I've been a Mac user for some time now, and I have a M1 MacBook Air that I use, kind of. You know, I use it a lot. And my daily driver is a Windows 10 gaming PC with a 5950X and a GTX 3080, which is what this is being edited on. So, you know, I bounce between all platforms, and at least Apple and Windows primarily. And I think there's, you know, value in each. Each have their strengths and weaknesses. So we're going to get to unboxing this, and I'll explain further. Now, I'll be first to admit, when I started in this industry, I was very anti-Apple. All the people I worked with, all my colleagues, at least most of them anyway, were very anti-Apple. And a lot of that came from the, you know, second coming of Steve Jobs era. When I started in IT, early 2000s, you know, Steve Jobs came back to Apple and, you know, took over the company, changed their direction, and the cult of Apple mentality sort of started then. I had watched enough people unbox this to know it's not like the old iMacs where they open from the top. Alright, I mean, it kind of does, but you have to lay it flat. Okay. It's kind of backwards here. So, I kept that anti-Apple mentality up until about 2009 when I bought an iMac on a whim. I started doing this YouTube channel, and, you know, the thing that I had always, you know, read and been told and heard is that Macs were the best for video editing. You know, all the video editing software, the best stuff at the time was on the Mac. And generally speaking, that was true. You know, I've worked for two major movie studios, and most of the Macs that we deployed were, at least when I was there, using Boot Camp, running Windows XP, and going out to executives that wanted a Mac, and they just wanted the prestige of a Mac, but they were still using Windows. And then the small percentage who were actually using the Macs for what they were intended for, I guess you could say, were the creative types that needed it for Photoshop and, you know, video editing and everything else. So, I bought one. And I'll be honest with you, it's one of the best computers I've ever owned in my entire life, and I've owned many. Let's get this out of here. I'm not a fan of this new box technique. The second studio I worked at was heavily focused on Macs, so I dealt with a lot of the 21 and 27-inch Macs, you know, in the mid to late 2000s, and I'm used to their specific box, and I think that's a better design. This is nice and all, it's pretty, but I don't know. I prefer the old way. Man, that is hyper thin. Let's put this back here. So, as I said, I'm platform agnostic, and I find value in, every ecosystem. And I think Apple gets a lot of hate for, that cult of Apple sort of mentality, which I don't fall into. It is kind of toxic. I'm not one. I watch a lot of these Apple-centric YouTubers, and they have that kind of cultish love for Apple in a way that is, frankly unhealthy. But as someone who uses Macs as well as PCs, there's definitely merit, and there's. I'll get to why I bought a Mac for my mother, and been giving her Macs. Her Macs that she's had so far have been hand-me-downs that I've used. This is the first one she's ever going to own that's brand new, hers, not mine. Something that I am setting up for her will be hers from beginning to end. So, that's one thing. Wow, this is nice. I can see this getting super dirty, this cable. It's like a nylon. It has a slight blue tinge, since this is the blue iMac that I got her. And it's nice. That connector, the power connector, this new magnetic one, is a little smaller than I was expecting. This is, by the way, not the base model. This does have the gigabit Ethernet ports on it. I upgraded it to the 16 gigs of RAM, and it has a 512 gigabyte SSD. I highly recommend, if you are going to buy one of these iMacs, that you don't buy the high-end storage. Use the ports in the back and use like an external SSD. That's what you want to do. So the reason I put my mom on a Mac is she's had Windows computers most of her life up until I gave her her first Mac, which was my 2009 iMac that I mentioned. And she is a prolific finder of viruses. And there was a period of time for a couple years there where even with every antivirus protection that I could think of, known to man, I was having to literally reformat her PC every 6 months, give or take. And I had tried putting her on different Linux distributions. I tried some later versions of Fedora. Well, later, when I say later, I'm talking like stuff in the 2010s, for example. And I had tried, Ubuntu and those sorts of things, and they have a bit of a learning curve for someone who's not, very savvy with a computer. And my biggest problem with most of them is, I'm sure a lot of you can relate who have tried to use multiple Linux distros. Updates tend to break things in a way that can't be reversed sometimes. So they could be, but to fix things when they go wrong in a Linux environment, especially like with drivers or something like that, I find that it's just a lot of pain. Plus, there's a lot of incompatibilities for things that they might want to use, a user might want to use. And the general desktop Linux environment has been pretty abysmal, generally speaking, I think, up until maybe fairly recently. And the Mac runs, a version of Unix and Linux. Yes, they're different. I understand that. I know you're going to go to the comments, they're not the same thing. Yes, well aware of that. However, they're related. They're cousins. They're very similar in many regards. So, versus Windows. So, it's one of those things where the Mac is running I like to think, a developed and maintained Unix environment, and that's why I gave her a Mac. It wasn't so much that she needed it for creative reasons, but it was to test that environment and see, if she could succeed in her everyday tasks and browsing, and it saved me a lot of maintenance. And you know what? It has. I also got her the full-size keyboard. I hate the one that doesn't have the numpad. I'm not sure she's going to use it, but this is the one with the fingerprint sensor for her to log in, so that's nice. So, I got her on a Mac, and I have never really had to do anything since, other than showing her the basics on how to get to things and setting up her dock with the applications she needs to use most. she's been able to browse the web relatively safely, and I have never had to reinstall macOS. I've never had to remove a Mac virus. I've never had any malware issues with the Mac with her in particular. It has been wonderful. And she's gotten used to the Mac. I actually gave her a Windows laptop at one point because she needed a laptop to take with her somewhere. And she wasn't comfortable with it anymore. She'd been using macOS for so long. So she's a Mac lady through and through at this point. So for me, macOS itself has paid in major dividends just for my peace of mind, for her browsing, for her safety on the web, and those sorts of things. It has been great. And what we also did is my girlfriend's mother also put her on a Mac for very similar reasons, and she's had a lot of success there as well. I think the Mac, for a user that will click on things that they absolutely shouldn't, I think the Mac really is the best platform for those sorts of people, because no antivirus is going to be able to save that type of person from themselves, as it were, to prevent them from infecting their computer and causing all kinds of havoc that will happen. I speak from many, many years of experience. I will say that I hate Apple's Magic Mouse. I think this is the worst mouse. I'd rather have the hockey puck, personally. I mean, it does have this nice, it does have that nice blue color to match the Mac, but this is probably the worst mouse in the world. I only got used to using it because, I'd go to some of my clients and they'd use this mouse and I'd have to be able to navigate with it, but generally speaking, this is probably going to stay in this cotton, or whatever this is, kind of material to protect it, and I'll keep it for a day that maybe this will be resold, because I know there are some of you out there who are a fan of it, and that's fine if you are, but as far as I'm concerned, this is garbage. So that's about it. I mean, there are plenty of unboxings out there of this thing, but I wanted to kind of talk about why I think there's value in purchasing a Mac, especially for, let's say, elderly or very, very non-technical people. In my experience, it has been a great source of... Man, this box is heavy on its own. It's been a great source of peace of mind, generally speaking. I think macOS in general has been great in that regard. Now, there are some things to say about the hardware. Now, I'm hyper aware of the issues with Apple hardware that have, plagued it somewhat in the past. I watched Louis Rossmann, like many of you, and I'm very well of Apple's anti-right to repair shenanigans. However, Apple's not the only one who does that. I mean, I understand they're one of the biggest proponents against it, but they're not the only one. And as again, I think Apple gets the most flack, probably because they're the most... It's easy to hate Apple. It's easy to hate Apple for some of their cultish sorts of policies, marketing, stances on the industry, a lot of things. But, every computer manufacturer out there is guilty of delivering on subpar hardware. I mean, let's look at Android phones, for example. Samsung probably delivers the best Android phone, arguably, that could be, in the industry, generally speaking, hardware-wise. And I know there's some Pixel people out there who prefer Google's offerings. When I used Android, I was a big HTC fan for a while there. But, generally speaking, there's so many crap Android phones out there from all the manufacturers that they're not just as bad, if not worse. And in a lot of ways, I think Google is worse in a lot of regards, because, Google, unfortunately, is a wannabe Apple these days. Let's see. Okay. Google is purposely trying to limit the Android environment in the same way Apple does, for their own ecosystem. They're trying to limit it. They're trying to copy Apple and trying to lock down the environment. I mean, how many years was Android allowed to have? How many years were manufacturers allowed to have, a billion different versions of Android out there to run all of their multiple phones and crappy tablets? Wow, this thing's light. Ugh. Better do it from sitting down. Cannot. Anyway. And eventually Google said, well, we got to close the environment. We don't have that same kind of control that Apple does. That control really benefits Apple because, they know exactly what hardware is out there. We know what revisions there are. They're not having to emulate for multiple phones and multiple sets of processors and, different hardware manufacturers. Oh, this is kind of sticky. I wasn't expecting that. That's interesting. So, your Samsung phone might have like 1 billion gigabytes of RAM and 20 cores and, all that jazz. But at the end of the day, they have to do that because they don't, they have to emulate for multiple sets of hardware. And Apple doesn't. That's why Apple can get away with, on paper specs that are much lower. Less RAM, less powerful CPUs, GPUs, whatever, and they still run better. And I like to say that, Apple gets first dibs and Android gets sloppy seconds when it comes to most applications. And that's the truth. Android users don't like to face that reality a lot of times, but that is the truth. And I have really been disappointed with Android the last couple of years in general. So I haven't had an Android phone in a little while. In fact, my last Samsung was one of the worst phones I'd ever owned. Well, hello there to you too, computer. Oh no, it's speaking Spanish. No. Let's pair the keyboard as well. Man, that screen is nice. I haven't even got to the desktop and I can tell it's nice. I hate this mouse though. Mostly the scrolling. And then they also, they do reverse scrolling, which I hate as well. This little talking head unboxing is not going to convince Apple haters to start liking Apple products and want to purchase them. There's no point in that. They're going to be fanboys no matter what happens. I just want to make it clear that, at least in my opinion, the Mac has its place. It has its audience. There are, like I said, those cultish type of people. But for someone who isn't part of that cult and doesn't drink the Kool-Aid, like me, and likes many parts of the Mac, Mac OS environment, especially what it saves me in headache for, older people, and in some cases older clients, it has its place. It has its value. And they are anti-repair, but again, most corporations are. They just are the easy one to target. And I have no idea how long this Mac is going to last. I generally tell people not to buy a Generation 1 Apple product. I tell them to wait at least one generation, whatever new device there is, for example. But in this particular case, my mother needed a computer that, functions at a decent speed, and she doesn't have to, walk away from it for things to load, that sort of thing. I am taking a risk, buying a first-generation Apple product, this being a first-generation iMac, with the new M1 chip. But in my experience, most Apple products have served me for a long, long time and have not failed. And, like I said, I've watched the Louis Rossmann videos. I'm well aware of Apple's blunders, but when they work, they work, And if it does fail on me, I understand that is a risk I'm taking right now. But generally speaking, most of the Apple devices that I have distributed to users or have purchased myself have survived and thrived and have worked for more years than most PCs that I've owned, in the same amount of time. They just seem to work. They seem to last. And they hold their resale value. That's one other thing to keep in mind. Now, if you're staunchly anti-Apple and want to buy a computer for, say, a child or, again, someone who's elderly or someone who's not very proficient with technology, my recommendation might be a Chromebook. For kids, they won't be able to play their games on it, but if it's something that you just want to be able to give to them and not worry about them damaging it, because of viruses and, going to websites that might cause harm, I'm not saying they're invulnerable. No computer is. Neither is the Mac. But functionally speaking, they're not the biggest target that most malware is designed to hit. And in the Mac's case, most things have to be installed with a password or the Touch ID sensor, and most things get blocked on that level anyway. The Mac environment is better, in my experience, about blocking any unintended self-installations. The Mac just doesn't allow it typically. Again, no computer is invulnerable to these things. But for everyday use, like I said in the beginning of the video, my mother was having me reformat her PC, fresh install Windows every 6 months. No matter how much training I tried to give her on what not to click on and what sites to go to, it was always a problem. I gave her a Mac, and all I had to do was run some maintenance scripts once in a while. Completely cleared all that up. And that is worth its weight in gold. Look at that. Out of the box, and it already needs an update. So we're going to be updating this thing, getting her data over, and getting her up and running on this new Mac. I do have to show her Big Sur because it does look a little different than Catalina, which is what her current Mac is on. But knowing the speed of this machine just by, the MacBook Air, just knowing how fast that thing is, night and day. I'm sure she's going to be very happy with this thing, and I'm happy that I was able to get it for her. This was supposed to be her Mother's Day present, but, well, it technically is, but, they didn't ship it until now. I just got it in today. So, anyway, if you have any questions or comments, go ahead and put them below. If you disagree with me, that's perfectly fine. Again, I'm platform agnostic. I use what works. Every platform has a strength and weakness. And even though Apple has its cultish nature and is very anti-right to repair and those sorts of things, functionally, for this use case, I don't think there's a better computer. And this computer right here is really designed for someone like my mother. It is just a computer that works. It is a computer that I'm going to give to her, and it's just going to work. It will do updates, but it's just going to work, and I don't have to do anything but run maintenance scripts every couple months. I'll put Time Machine for her backups. All of these things that automate that process, and I can go back to if we need to, are there, and they function, have been tested and developed over time. And as far as I'm concerned, it's very mature and it's baked into the product so well that I think it's a no-brainer for someone who can afford it. And, for someone maybe like you, if you're watching this, getting tired of having your mother or father or whoever, grandmother, run into problems because the internet is a unsavory place, this might be the solution for you. It was for me, and it continues to be. I've recommended it for a lot of people over the years, and they buy a Mac or, in some cases, a Chromebook, which is a Linux distribution or Unix. It's basically, Linux, Unix, just like your phone is, practically. And those issues mostly go away. Mostly. Can't prevent everything. Anyway, I'm going to keep rambling. So far, I like what I see. and we're going to do some testing, get it up and ready for my mom, and she's going to be very happy. So if you have any questions or comments, put them below. If you disagree with me, go ahead and put them below as well. Please subscribe and let me know what you think. Thank you.